poor thing. Anyway, this is really important. I think what's missing is we're getting treated, this county, we're special. We lead, not follow. We treat everything holistically, the whole person. If there's going to be fluoride in the water, there's going to be fluoride in our cats, and our salmon, and in our organic gardens. So we treat things holistically here, and I think that's where we got to stay the course. What was the thing I want to say? Okay, so I think I said everything I want to say. What I want to say about Paul that's funny is that, like I said, he was here for a Zero Waste conference. Ralph Nader said about him, he's the only person to make waste and garbage interesting. And he is doing this totally pro bono. So before you leave tonight, what the teachers were selling, the books were selling, we're doing that to raise the money for the ticket to get them back April 11th. So be clear of that. That's nobody's making any money. This thing, we're all working for free here. His first degree is from Cambridge. His PhD is from Dartmouth in chemistry. He's writing a book right now on zero waste, and he's looked upon as a leader in that. And I think he thinks, and you teach at St. Lawrence University, and you're retired now. You're too young, but that's okay. The funniest thing, if anyone's heard him on the radio today, KSRO, is that he went to school with John Cleese. You want to sing for us? Always look on the bright side. So you can hear it, because he has a cute little accent. So you know, like even when he cusses, it sounds cute. No, never mind. So anyhow, okay, come on up. I think I'm not going to wear it out because you tell a lot of stuff that you've done in your flyers, in your PowerPoint. So I'm going to let you go.
Thank you. Well, that is an experience being driven around by Dorna. I know what it's like to be in a tsunami. What do we call that? One of those things. Anyway, thank you everybody for coming, and let's get straight into it. Introduction. I've spent 17 years researching this issue, first as a professor of chemistry. I specialized in environmental chemistry and toxicology. I did not want the issue. My wife persuaded me to get involved. I didn't want it because I was engaged full-time teaching chemistry, and all my weekends and holidays were mortgaged to helping communities around the world on waste management. That issue has taken me to 49 states in the United States, 7 provinces in Canada, and by the end of next month, to 60 different countries. So I didn't want a second issue, and I certainly didn't want a second issue which would stigmatize me as Looney Tunes, which is how people opposed to fluoridation have been portrayed for many years. However, I did start to read the literature that my wife gave me, and I was absolutely shocked and embarrassed that I'd been conned into thinking the opponents of fluoridation were crazy. Anyway, this work culminated in the publication of this book, which I wrote with 2 other scientists, James Beck, an MD, PhD from Calgary in Alberta, and Spenny Micklem, a biologist trained at Oxford and taught at Edinburgh University. So we had a chemist, a physicist, and a biologist. We were all retired. We all had plenty of time to read the literature. It's understated, not overstated. It can be read by the ordinary citizen, but for those who have scientific qualifications, every single argument is documented in the scientific literature. There's 80 pages of references. And that's a little bit like tonight's presentation. Hopefully most of it is what I'm going to say is understandable. It's not submerged in jargon. You can understand it, but there are going to be places where you make a little note, go to the book or go to the website to get more information. So I'm going to start with 12 arguments against fluoridation. Then present the evidence of harm and argue that there's no adequate margin of safety to known health effects. Present the evidence that any benefit from swallowing fluoride is extremely weak. Ask answer the question, why do health agencies continue to push fluoridation? But you realize that that's difficult because you try to find a rational explanation for irrational behavior. Better alternatives to fight tooth decay. It's not enough to say no to something. It's much better if you can say yes to something else. And finally, some tips on how we might stop it in Sonoma County. Now, affecting change is like driving a nail through a piece of wood. The expert can sharpen the nail, but that expert can't push the nail through the piece of wood with their bare hands. You can't do it. So I cannot talk to anybody in this county and stop you getting fluoridation. But hopefully, if I sharpen a few nails tonight, you will be able to stop it coming into Sonoma County, because we need the hammer of public opinion to drive the nail home. Now that doesn't work unless you leave this auditorium tonight feeling that you understand these arguments well enough to use some. Not all of them, but some of them. If all you have to say at the end is, well, I heard Professor Connett and he was very convincing, then someone says to you, well, what did he tell you that convinced you? Oh, I don't remember that, but I do remember he was convincing. That's not good enough, okay? So hopefully you can remember these 12 arguments. I will be elaborating on each as we go through, but let's see at the end how many you've remembered, and there will be a quiz. So the first argument is fluoride is not a nutrient. To demonstrate that the substance is a nutrient, you have to starve an animal of this substance in its diet and demonstrate that some disease occurs. That's never been done for fluoride. There's no such thing as a fluoride deficient disease. Tooth decay is not caused by lack of fluoride, but by too much sugar. There's not one single biochemical process inside the body that needs fluoride to function properly. On the other hand, many biochemical processes are harmed by fluoride. And in fact, the first opponents of fluoridation were biochemists, and some of them very prominent biochemists. Biochemists who won the Nobel Prize. For example, James Sumner at Cornell won the Nobel Prize for his work on enzyme chemistry, and he warned, fluoride poisons enzymes. You don't want it anywhere near your body, don't put it in the water. Now, for those who want to get right up to date with all the ways that fluoride is toxic in the body, the kind of things that it can affect, even at low doses, this article is a recent review article. That is only for people with a biochemical training. But it's useful for you to know that there is substance out there which documents all the nasty things that it can do. Now, is 1 part per million large or small? That's the level that we add fluoride, approximately, add fluoride to the water, 1 milligram per litre. Is that large or small? Well, the promoters say it is teeny weeny weeny. It's very, very small, they say. And they say this 1 part per million is 1 cent in $1,000. It is in $10,000. 1 cent in $10,000. Oh, I got my arithmetic wrong. It's 1 inch in 16 miles. Well, a toxicologist would laugh at that, because they would tell you whether 1 part per million is large or small depends upon the substance that you're talking about. If we were talking about dioxin, 1 part per million is 1,000,000 times too much. We are concerned about parts per trillion if it was dioxin. If it was arsenic, 1 part per million is 100 times the safe drinking water standard for arsenic. So it depends what the substance is before we are convinced that something is large or small. Now, the level which I think gives us an indication of the fact that 1 part per million is actually large is the level in mother's milk. The levels that we fluoridate at are actually about 200 times the level of fluoride in mother's milk. A mother that lives in a non-fluoridated community, on average, has about 0.004 parts per million, and that is 250 times less than 1 part per million, or if you go to 0.7, it's 175 times less, but it's about 200 times less. So what does nature know that the American Dental Association does not know? It took millions of years to develop the mammal. We evolved from the sea. There was plenty of fluoride in the sea, 1.4 parts per million. And yet through all the twists and turns of evolution, with an adequate supply of fluoride to draw upon, nature decided that the baby needed very, very little. Our scientists, with a lack of humility, feel that they can give our babies 250 times more than nature. Argument number 3. Fluoridation is a very poor medical practice. Once we put a medicine in the water, we cannot control the dose. We can control the concentration, milligrams per litre. That our engineers can control at the waterworks. What we can't control is the dose in milligrams per day, because that depends on how many litres you drink. If you drink 1 litre at 1 part per million, you're going to get 1 milligram. If you drink 2 litres, you're going to get 2 milligrams. 3 litres, 3 milligrams. But it's worse than that. We can't control the dose because not only do people get fluoride from water, but today they get it from dental products, and they get it from air pollution, and they get it from pesticides, and they get it from fertilizers, and they get it from foods which have high natural levels, like tea and mechanically deboned meat. Secondly, once you put it in the water, you can't control who gets it. It goes to everybody. It goes to young and old, sick and well, people with poor nutrition, people with poor kidney function that certainly shouldn't get fluoride, people with borderline iodine deficiency, they shouldn't get fluoride, but it goes to everybody once you put it in the water. Ask a pharmacist the next time you go in, is there any drug in this store that you can give to anybody at any dose? And he's going to laugh in your face. Of course, it's not possible to do that. And finally, and most importantly, it violates the individual's right to informed consent to medication. If you're in any doubt about the need for doctors to follow this, look up the American Medical Association's webpage. They make it very clear what a doctor can and cannot do. The doctors are supposed to tell you what the benefits of the drug are, what the side effects of the drug are, and in theory, you are meant to decide for yourself whether you're going to take that drug. Now, I know in practice, most of us do what the doctor tells us, but in theory at least, we should have that right to say no if we don't want to take that medicine for some reason. And if at that point the doctor tried to force it upon you, he or she would lose their license. Very important. So what we've got here then is the whole community is doing to everyone what an individual doctor can do to no one. Force you to take medication. Now they sometimes say, we only deliver the water to the tap. You determine whether you're going to drink it or not. Now, maybe if you're middle income, maybe if you're high income, you have the luxury of getting an alternative water source. But that's certainly not true of families of low income. They don't have the luxury of getting an alternative source of water or buy expensive technology. The fourth argument is that the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, has never regulated fluoride for ingestion to fight tooth decay, either as a prescription drug or in water. According to the FDA, it is an unapproved drug. And as a result, they haven't required the same stringent testing that goes into other drugs. Other drugs require randomized clinical trials to demonstrate that the drug is both safe and effective. That's never been done with fluoridation. After 68 years, there's never been a randomized trial to demonstrate effectiveness or safety. Next, because the FDA has not approved this drug, it's not collecting from patients or doctors any information about side effects. And as I'm sure you're well aware, that the FDA does that, and after a while, if there's too many complaints of side effects, then the drug is taken off the market, like Vioxx. But that only came about because the FDA was tracking the responses. No tracking for fluoride. The fifth argument, it's ineffective. The evidence that water fluoridation, and I'm here talking about swallowing fluoride, reduces tooth decay is extremely weak. I shall be going into details later, but right now, if you go to chapters 6 through 8 in our book, we go through that lack of evidence. It was very weak at the beginning when it started, and it's weak today. So more upon that later tonight. 6, any benefit, and this is the reason, by the way, the reason that the evidence of swallowing fluoride reduces tooth decay is weak is because even now the promoters of fluoridation have admitted that it works topically. The predominant action of fluoride is topical. This was first stated by the Center for Disease Control in 1999. And at that point should have been a place where we stopped fluoridation. Once they admitted that the benefit of fluoride is topical, it no longer makes sense to swallow it and expose every tissue in the body to a toxic substance. Fluoridated toothpaste is universally available. The more difficult toothpaste to get in our society is non-fluoridated toothpaste. So it's readily available. Brush it on your teeth and spit it out. So this way you protect all the other tissues in the body from this toxic substance, and also you're not forcing it on people that don't want it. So they could have solved the medical issues, they could have solved the ethical issue with one change in strategy. Instead of delivering fluoride to people with the water supply, you educate the people to use fluoridated toothpaste. If you want fluoride. I don't want fluoride at all, so I haven't used fluoridated toothpaste for 16 years. But if I had to make a choice as a government official, I would rather they promote fluoridated toothpaste than fluoride in the water. There, incidentally, is the exact quote from the CDC. Fluorides carries preventive properties. Initially, were attributed to changes in enamel during tooth development. And that's why doctors gave tablets to pregnant women and drops to babies before their teeth had come out. The idea is that the fluoride would build up in the enamel and protect the teeth when they erupted into the mouth. However, laboratory and epidemiological research suggests that fluoride prevents dental caries predominantly after eruption of the tooth into the mouth, and its actions are primarily topical. It works on the outside of the tooth, not from inside the body. 7. The chemicals used in fluoridation are not pharmaceutical grade, not the same grade that we use in toothpaste, etc. These chemicals are industrial waste products derived from the air pollution control systems of the phosphate fertilizer industry. They use a spray of water to capture 2 very toxic gases which damage the environment near phosphate plants for many years. This spray of water captures hydrogen fluoride and silicon tetrafluoride and makes a substance called hexafluorosilicic acid. With all chemicals, the formula is easier to remember than the name. So hexafluorosilicic acid is H2SI, small I for silicon, F6. Hexa meaning 6. Hexafluorosilicic acid. The correct name. Anyway, cut a long story short, they can't dump this stuff into the sea by international law. They can't dump it locally because it's too concentrated, but if someone buys it from them, it then becomes a product, and then we put it in our drinking water supply. And there's a famous statement from Rebecca Hanmer at the EPA, who's saying this is a wonderful solution. This is a solution to an air pollution problem and gives us a cheap chemical to use in fluoridation programs. Except she forgot to mention that this hexafluorosilicic acid contains all kinds of contaminants. Not only in Florida they mine this phosphate rock for fertilizer, they mine it for uranium. And so there's some small quantities of radioactive isotopes in this. But the one that's simplest to remember is there's arsenic in there. And arsenic is a known human carcinogen. So inevitably, the use of these chemicals which contain arsenic will increase cancer rates in the United States. This is regardless of whether fluoride itself causes cancer. Arsenic is a known human carcinogen. We can argue about how much the rates of cancer will increase, but they can't argue that they won't increase, because as far as the EPA is concerned, it will cause cancer right down to one molecule. Argument number 8. Our children are being overexposed to fluoride. This is particularly relevant to Sonoma County, because you can benefit from this information, or your officials can benefit from this information. According to the Center for Disease Control, a report in 2010, 41% of American children aged 12 to 15 have some form of dental fluorosis. This is a mottling, a discoloration of the enamel, little white patches, varying in severity. And it is a well-known marker, visible marker, that that child has received too much fluoride during the development of its teeth. When they started fluoridation in 1945, they thought they would limit dental fluorosis to 10% of the population. And that was the trade-off. We would reduce tooth decay, they thought, and only get 10% of the kids would get the very, very mildest form of dental fluorosis. Run the clock forward, we're 4 times worse than that. 41% of American kids, and not all in its very mild form. Later on, I should be showing you pictures of what dental fluorosis looks like and give you the percentages of what American children have. 9. Teeth are not the only tissue impacted by fluoride. In my view, it would be a biochemical miracle if the only tissue that was affected by fluoride's very active biological properties would be the growing tooth cells. But the thing is, we can see this effect, you see, so they can't deny it. They cannot deny dental fluorosis because you can see it with the visible eye. But they do deny impacts on the bone, they do deny impacts on the brain, and impacts on the thyroid system. Why? Because we can't see it. And because we're not doing any studies to see if it's happening. If you don't look, you don't find. This is what Arvid Carlsson led the successful campaign against fluoridation in Sweden in the 70s. And one of the things he said at that time was, one wonders what an increase in exposure to fluoride, such as occurs with bottle-fed infants, may mean for the development of the brain and other tissues. A very, very prophetic statement, as we shall see. I'll be looking at effects on the brain later. 10. There's no adequate margin of safety to protect the whole population. And here you have to guard against 2 simple, simplistic statements from proponents. They don't understand the difference between concentration and dose. So if there's an effect, say at 3 parts per million, they will say, but that's 4 times the level that we're planning, 0.7. As if that was some kind of protection. Somebody drinking water at 0.7 parts per million could get a higher dose than someone drinking fluoridated water at 3 parts per million. Again, it depends upon how much water people drink. So in terms of the dose, the two populations, one drinking water at 0.7 and one drinking water at 3 parts per million, would overlap. The doses would overlap. So to say it's higher concentration is to miss the point and indicate that very well qualified health officials do not understand the first lesson in toxicology, which is the difference between concentration and dose. The second thing is this notion of what is high, when what we should be doing is to see if there's an adequate margin of safety. In fact, these are words that you never hear coming out of the mouths of a fluoridation proponent. You hear high and low. What you don't hear is margin of safety. And let me put it in a nutshell, and I'll come back and elaborate on this more with an example later on. What we mean by margin of safety is this. Standard toxicology. If you're looking at a toxic substance, you find the lowest dose of your toxic substance that causes harm in a small study group. You usually only have a small study group. And then, having found that dose, to determine the safe dose for a large population containing millions of people, you divide by 10. It's called the intra-species safety factor. You divide by 10 to get the dose to protect the most vulnerable person in your population. Divide by 10. Some people would say you need to divide by more to protect for babies and young children, but at least 10. So you find your dose which causes harm, divide by 10, and that's what we would call the safe reference dose. Very important. I'll be coming back to that. I would stake my whole political, my scientific reputation on there being no adequate margin of safety to protect against several endpoints. Not an adequate margin of safety to protect against hip fractures for lifelong exposure. Not enough margin of safety to protect against arthritic symptoms. Not enough margin of safety to protect against lowering thyroid function. And not enough margin of safety to protect against the lowering of IQs in children, which I shall come back to. And let's also make that something else clear. Obviously, there's an argument about whether or not fluoridation causes harm. And that's what a large amount of this presentation is about, is looking at the literature that indicates that there is likely to be harm from fluoridation. But there's no argument about something else, and that is there's no argument that fluoride damages health. Fluoride, the iron, the salt, whatever you call it, the compound, has damaged the lives of millions of people in India, China, parts of Africa, parts of Mexico, which have high natural levels of fluoride. And those countries, particularly China and India, are spending a fortune trying to get fluoride out of their water, whilst we are trying to put it in. So more on fluoride's impact on the brain to come. Fluoridation may actually be killing a few men each year. Some studies have found an association between exposure to fluoride at a particular time in a young male's life and a frequently fatal bone cancer called osteosarcoma. Now, you know, the evidence of reducing tooth decay would have to be pretty strong, and the evidence for that pretty weak for any responsible official to say we should go on. In other words, can you imagine any official saying there's a certain amount of tooth decay which we can save, and it doesn't matter if a few young children die of osteosarcoma each year? I don't think that is reasonable. So more on fluoride and osteosarcoma to come. 12. Most countries in the world do not fluoridate their water. In fact, more than half the people drinking artificially fluoridated water live in North America. About 400 million worldwide, over 200 million in America. 97% of European countries do not fluoridate their water. There they are. These are the 97% of European countries that do not fluoridate their water. Some started, like the Netherlands, but stopped. Some had one town fluoridated, Finland, Sweden, Germany, and stopped. Eastern Germany was fluoridated until the two Germanys combined, and they stopped. Switzerland had a few cities fluoridated, they have stopped. 4 of those countries fluoridate their salt. But here the customer, the patient, the individual has some choice in the matter. You can either buy fluoridated salt or non-fluoridated salt. It's up to you. But you're not forcing it on other people, unless you're a cook. Okay. But according to World Health Organization data, tooth decay in 12-year-olds, it's coming down as fast in the fluoridated as the non-fluoridated countries. So here's the time scale. Here we have data from the 1960s through to the present. And this is tooth decay in 12-year-olds. And you'll notice it's coming down as fast as these top 12 fluoridated countries. Those in the, I think it's green, those are non-fluoridated countries. United Kingdom has about 10% fluoridated, and the red box are the fluoridated ones. I don't think you can tell the difference between the fluoridated and the non-fluoridated countries as far as the decline in tooth decay. In other words, tooth decay has been coming down in Western countries throughout the industrialized world in this same period. And if you look at the results today, it's a wash. You can't tell the difference in tooth decay between some of these countries which are fluoridated and some of those countries which are non-fluoridated. Part 2, evidence of harm, no adequate margin of safety from known health effects of fluoride. That's what we're going to look at now. Health concerns. Now, the health concerns were beautifully summarized in this 500-page report from the National Research Council. This is the full title, Fluoride in Drinking Water, a scientific review of EPA's standards. This report was requested by the US EPA's Water Division. Look at our safety standards for water, are they adequate? This is the marvelous thing about this report. It was the first panel ever selected to look at fluoride or fluoridation, which was balanced. They had 3 pro-fluoridation scientists, 3 anti-fluoridation scientists, and 6 uncommitted. They expected to take a year, but it took them 3.5 years, and their final report, 507 pages and 1,100 references. This is like the Bible of toxicology on fluoride today. Now, having said that, the fluoridation promoters have done their best to downplay or completely ignore this report by the National Research Council. So, for example, on the day that the report was released, the same day, the ADA declared that it was irrelevant to water fluoridation, erroneously claiming that the NRC panel concerned itself only with water containing fluoride at 4 parts per million. They didn't have time to read the reports. They certainly didn't have time to check up on any of the references. And they certainly didn't have time to do a risk assessment to determine a new safe water drinking standard, which is what the NRC recommended. It took the EPA 5 years even to start this risk assessment. But apparently the ADA was able to do it in 1 day and find out that it was perfectly okay. The fluoridation was perfectly okay. This is politics, not science, I think is pretty reasonable to conclude. It took Tweedledum, that's the CDC Oral Health Division, just 6 days to copy Tweedledee. And they declared on their website, the findings of the NRC report are consistent with CDC's assessment that water is safe and healthy at the levels used for water fluoridation. What a relief that is. Well, it isn't really, because it's clearly that their top scientists in these organizations can't read. Because if they'd read Chapter 2 of the National Research Council report, it was an exposure analysis. And that exposure analysis concluded that certain subsets of the population were exceeding the EPA safe reference dose of 0.06 milligrams per kilogram per day, drinking fluoridated water at 1 part per million. That's black and white. Not relevant to water fluoridation. Amazing. These subsets, incidentally, included high water drinkers and bottle-fed babies. Bottle-fed babies are exceeding the safe reference dose for fluoride. And don't forget, if you put fluoride in Sonoma County, low-income families will be forced to use fluoridated tap water to make up baby formula and will therefore be giving their babies above safe reference standards. Now, I want you to read carefully what Dr. John Dewell, the chairman of this committee, he's also an author of one of the most used books on toxicology in the United States, maybe worldwide. Dewell, John Dewell, he said what the committee found is that we've gone with the status quo regarding fluoride for many years, for too long really, and now we need to take a fresh look. In the scientific community, people tend to think that this is settled. I did. I mean, when the US Surgeon General comes out and says this is one of the top 10 greatest achievements of the 20th century, that's a hard hurdle to get over. But when we looked at the studies that have been done, we found that many of these questions are unsettled, and we have much less information than we should, considering how long this fluoridation has been going on. That's an excellent article in Scientific American. I really urge you to get that back copy, January of 2008. Now juxtapose that with public health officials like your Dr. Chalfin, who will get on a public platform and say fluoridation is perfectly safe and is very effective. And we've been doing this for years and years and years, there's no problems. Contrast that with a professor of toxicology who's written a standard text on toxicology. We don't have all the questions, and that's one of the reasons cited by European countries. They cite 2 reasons for not fluoridating their water. One, we don't want to force fluoridation on people that don't want it. And secondly, we do not believe that all the health issues have been resolved. Now, the harmful effects of fluoride that were discussed in this NRC report was 1, dental fluorosis, 2, bone damage, 3, lowered thyroid function, 4, the accumulation in the human pineal gland, 5, brain damage, 6, osteosarcoma, and some other things, but I'll just stop there. Now let me start with dental fluorosis. I've referred to this already. Here's the chapter and verse. November 2010, the CDC reported dental fluorosis rates in the country. And this is the data for 12 to 15-year-olds. 12 to 15-year-olds. And the green bar is the current percentage of children with different categories. So children today, American children with very mild dental fluorosis, 28.5%. Children with mild, 8.6%. Children with moderate or severe, 3.6%. And notice this sharp increase over the last 10 years or so. Now I want you to have a look at those 3 categories. Very mild, mild, and moderate or severe. There's very mild dental fluorosis. This is one end of the range, the spectrum. The very mildest of very mild dental fluorosis is little white specks on the cusp of the teeth, usually on the corners. Look at the front teeth, and it's symmetrical. Okay, but at the other end of the range, it can cover up to 25% of the tooth surface. So you get these white patches, and sometimes with age, they stain. They stain yellow, orange, brown, and eventually black. Now, as I said, there's 28.5% of our kids have that condition. And when they started fluoridation, they expected that number to be 10%, and only that, very mild. Now, 8.6% of our kids have this condition. 8.6% of American children, 12 to 15, have up to 50% of their tooth surface impacted in that way. And 3.6% of our kids, this is the last category, have either moderate or severe, in which 100% of the tooth enamel is impacted, with discoloration, with indentations, and with severe dental fluorosis, with chipping. They become very brittle, the moderate or severe dental fluorosis. And you have to ask yourself why we should do this to 1 in 3 kids in America, and presumably in Sonoma County in days to come, or years to come. Now, their response is, well, this is not all caused by water fluoridation. No, it isn't. What you're looking at here is the total impact of total fluoride exposure. And unless you're planning in Sonoma County to reduce the use of fluoridated toothpaste, and reduce the use of tea, reduce the use of fertilizers and pesticides with fluoride in it, you're going to get the total dose. In other words, water fluoridation is additional impact to everything else that we're getting. Bone down. Oh, and I suggested to Dr. Chalfin this afternoon, midday, I said, look, if you wanted to be scientific about this, what you would do now, instead of spending $170,000 on an engineering and PR campaign, you would spend some of that money and do a survey to see what the current prevalence of dental fluorosis is amongst children in this county. And if that number came back as over 10%, or let's be conservative, over 15%, then you can conclude by your own theories that those kids are getting more than enough fluoride to reduce tooth decay. Because that was the original trade-off. 1 part per million will lower tooth decay and only give 10 to 15% of the kids with dental fluorosis. That would be scientific. But as you know, there's nothing scientific about the promotion of fluoridation. So let's go to the bones now. One of the first studies, one of the first trials of fluoridation in the United States was in Newburgh, Kingston, New York. This incidentally was designed partly by the Manhattan Project. Scientists in the Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb, making of World War II, were interested in the low-level effects of fluoride, and the chairman of the committee that set up this trial was the chief toxicologist of the Manhattan Project, and the results of this study were fed on a daily basis to Rochester, New York. Now, for those who like conspiracies, you can absorb this one. Howard Hodge was part of the team that injected people with plutonium. Now, it's hard to believe that American scientists, especially ones with a very positive reputation like Howard Hodge, would actually inject people with plutonium without their knowledge, just because they were terminal patients. We thought that only took place in Nazi Germany, right? We Americans would not countenance anything like that. But the same scientist, which was part of that team, was the same scientist who went around this country from 1950 through to the 1970s telling everybody that fluoridation was safe and effective, partly on this experiment. But anyway, politics to one side, one of the things that they found out was the incidence of cortical bone defects were about twice as high in the fluoridated town compared to the non-fluoridated town. 13.5% versus 7.5%. The difference was statistically significant. Well, what is the cortical bone? The bone has two parts to it. The inside bone is called trabecular, from trabs, meaning support. The center of the bone is important for the spine, the pelvis, and so on. Weight-supporting bones. That's the structure, to support weight. The outside layer of the bone, which is the bone, the legs and the arms and so on, is the cortical bone structure. That's a lamellar structure, and that is designed to resist fracture. So when they saw more defects in the cortical bone of the fluoridated kids, they should have wondered whether there was an increase in bone fractures amongst those children. But no studies were done on those children for bone fractures, or any other children in the United States since this experiment began. But they did do an experiment in Mexico and published in 2001, where what they did was a very useful methodology. They compared bone fractures in local clinics with the severity of dental fluorosis. And what they found is as the severity of dental fluorosis went up from no, very mild, moderate, and severe, the bone fractures occurring in the local clinics went up in almost a linear fashion, not only for the children, but for adults as well. Of course, the proponents rushed in and criticized the methodology. But what they didn't do was to see if the same thing was happening in America, even though we have millions of children in each of these categories. We could have been looking at this a long, long time ago, but we didn't. Now, arthritis. The first symptoms of fluoride poisoning of the bones, we know this from India, we've known it for a long time. The first symptoms do not show up on x-rays, but that people complain of stiffness of joints, pains in the joints, and pains in the bones. And these symptoms are identical to arthritis. And according to the Center for Disease Control, we have 68 million people in the United States, 1 in 3 American adults, with some form of arthritis. And if you ask your doctor, "Doc, you tell me I've got arthritis, what causes that?" And what they usually say is, "Oh, we don't really know, but we think it's got something to do with aging." Oh, well, could it possibly have something to do with how many years you've been absorbing fluoride into your bones? 50% of the fluoride that you take in each day is deposited in your bones. And if you have poor kidney function, it can be as high as 90%. So if you do that for lifelong, are you going to increase your arthritis rates? Well, that would be a nice thing to study, but it's never been studied in the United States. No fluoridating country, neither Australia, New Zealand, Israel, Ireland, Canada, or the United States, Malaysia, or Singapore have attempted to see if there's any relationship between the duration of exposure to fluoride and arthritis. Extraordinary, but true. Now, this is from the National Research Council. All members of the committee agreed that there is scientific evidence that under certain conditions, fluoride can weaken bone and increase the risk of fractures. The fracture that we are most concerned about is this bone here. It's pretty fragile. This is the iliac crest bone, which joins the thigh bone to the pelvis. That's what breaks if you're elderly and have a fall. And the sad thing is that for elderly people, if that happens, 50% of them never regain an independent existence because you have to immobilize the patient for several months, and by that time their muscles have atrophied, and if you're very old, it's difficult to get them back. 25% are dead within a year of the operation, of the hip replacement. Now, The epidemiological studies are mixed. Some studies have found an increase of hip fractures in fluoridated communities, and other studies have not. This, to me, is the most important study. It was done in China, where they looked at hip fractures in the elderly in 6 different villages of increasing fluoride concentration in their wells. And they chose this area because everything was pretty constant and stable about this population. They hadn't moved for generations, for hundreds of years. They all had the same diet. They didn't have hormonal therapy. It was really a beautiful study for controlling most of the variables. Now you notice they have compared, the odds ratio is comparing the rate of hip fractures with this village here. This is the village at 1 part per million. Okay, so this is a village, this is a study to see if there's an increase in hip fractures as you change the fluoride levels in the water. Now look at this point, because this point here is a point of great contention. It says hip fractures are doubled at 1.5 parts per million, 1.5 to 2 parts per million. But bigger toxicologists, you'd have to assume the lowest level, so at 1.5 parts per million, hip fractures are doubled. The promoters say, that's not statistically significant. That's not statistically significant. This is statistically significant. So, if you're a proponent of fluoridation, you say you don't have to worry until you go above 4 parts per million to get an increase in hip fracture. Except somebody has to explain why it should triple. Now, in our book, we look at this. This to us, for us, independent scientists, this looks to us like a trend. It may not be statistically significant, but it looks like a trend that hip fractures are going up as you increase the fluoride levels in the water. And even though this is the only point that's statistically significant, if this is a trend, then these points are real. They're real points, but not statistically significant. All right. Statistical significance is not the only thing of relevance in epidemiological studies. Now, we have plotted here the prevalence of hip fractures here against the dose that the researchers calculated, the average dose calculated in these villages, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 milligrams per day. Now, you can make, I'm going to ask you to vote on this. Which do you think is the most reasonable interpretation of this data? This, a linear trend. Does that data look like a linear trend to you, or does it look like this? In other words, nothing happens until you get to 14 milligrams a day and all of a sudden your hip fracture rates triple. Now I think it's more reasonable to suggest that that is the trend, that is real, and therefore we're looking at increased hip fracture rates maybe as low as 3 milligrams a day. 3 milligrams a day. And you're easily going to exceed that if you fluoridate your Sonoma County water. What a pity it is that there's no public health officials here to listen to this.
Yeah, where are they?
Are there any doctors here? Any medical doctors? Well, they're maintaining their convenient form of ignorance.
There's dentists.
Are there dentists? Yeah. Well, we don't expect dentists to know much about bones anyway. But we do expect doctors to know something about informed consent, and we do expect doctors to keep on top of the medical literature and to know the symptoms caused by fluoride. They're not taught that in medical school, but they had an opportunity tonight to get some valid information. They've chosen not to take it. Several lines of information indicate the effect of fluoride exposure on thyroid function. One of those lines of evidence was that doctors in Argentina, France and Germany used fluoride to lower the thyroid function of people with overactive thyroid. And the doses that they used, again, are easily exceeded in a fluoridated community. So now I want to go to the real interest for me. I've been interested in this in 17 years, ever since I got involved, and that's fluoride in the brain. Now, there have been over 100 animal experiments which shows that fluoride can enter the brain, concentrate in the brain, locate in different regions of the brain, and damage the brain, and cause behavioral changes, cause biochemical changes. An enormous literature there now, and some at low doses. Let me show you one animal experiment at a remarkably low dose. Varner and co-workers gave rats 1 part per million fluoride in their water for 1 year. One group got aluminium fluoride, correct pronunciation, and the other got sodium fluoride. Both groups had kidney damage, brain damage, visible under the microscope, and a greater uptake of aluminium into the brain and beta amyloid deposits, characteristic, some people think, of Alzheimer's disease. Pretty serious stuff. This is a 1 part per million. IQ studies. As of January of this year, there have now been 36 published studies from China, Iran, India, and Mexico, indicating that fairly modest fluoride exposure is associated with lowered IQ in children. Now, the study that I am particularly fond of is this one by Zhang from China. And the reason is two things. One is I visited these villages in China at the invitation of the author, and I also brought the author to give presentations on his work at Cornell and Harvard University. Anyway, he looked at the IQ of children in 2 villages, one village with less than 0.7 parts per million in the well water, one village between 2.5 and 4.5 parts per million. They controlled for lead exposure and iodine intake, 2 key variables. They controlled for everything else that they could possibly think of. When I visited the villages, what was striking is they were almost identical in appearance. The same occupations, rural farmers, the same housing, the same diet, same lifestyle, and the same schooling. This is eyeballing it. So, pretty good place for epidemiology. He found a drop of 5 to 10 IQ points across the whole age range, and a shift in the IQ curves for both males and females. Now notice the tails here. See the reduction in the number of children in the high IQ level, the very bright or genius level, and quite a noticeable increase in children in the mentally handicapped area. And we'll talk more about that later. Now, I asked Zhang to send me some extra information he had, and that is they measured the serum fluoride levels for each of the students, as well as, the children, as well as their IQ. And what he found was a linear decrease in IQ as the level of fluoride in the blood went up. The higher the level of fluoride in the blood, the lower the IQ, which brings this study closer to an individual exposure rather than a population view. Not just a high fluoride village versus a low fluoride village, but we're seeing an effect which correlates with individual exposure. Now, Zhang estimated that the threshold for lowering of IQ was 1.9 parts per million. And going back to our discussion of margin of safety, this offers no adequate margin of safety to protect all American children from the large range of doses that you can anticipate in a large population and the large range of sensitivity. Sorry about this. I can only assume this is when someone wants to shoot me. Okay. Now, no protection against the large range of exposure. A child just drinking 2 litres of water, that's not excessive. A child drinking 2 litres of water at 1 part per million would get a higher dose, 2 milligrams per day, than a child, one of those Chinese children, drinking 1 litre of water at 1.9 parts per million. It's pretty straightforward. In other words, it's not protective against the range of doses that we can expect in America. Also, they weren't using fluoridated toothpaste in those Chinese children. Nor, from the best I can understand, were they bottle feeding. It's a rural village. I think they were breastfeeding. So there's reason to believe that we have higher doses than those Chinese children. Now, to protect the full range of sensitivity in a large population, to protect the most sensitive person, we normally divide the dose that causes harm by 10. Remember, this is what I talked about before, the intra-species variation factor. What dose were the Chinese children getting at 1.9 parts per million? Well, we don't know, because they didn't report how much water they were drinking. So I'm going to have to do a range of calculations. I'm going to say, supposing they drank half a litre of water a day, then they were getting 0.95 milligrams per day. That's just 1.9 divided by 2. If they were drinking 1 litre of water a day, they were getting 1.9 milligrams. If they were drinking 2 litres of water a day, they were getting 3.8 milligrams per day. In other words, this is your lowest, this is the range of the lowest observable adverse effect level. We've got a range. We don't have a single number because we don't have an estimate of the average daily consumption of water. Now, here are our doses again. If we do the standard thing and divide by 10, those are the range of doses, safe doses, would range, these are these numbers divided by 10, 0.95 to 0.38 milligrams per day. We would not want a child in America to drink more fluoride than 0.38 milligrams per day, which means about 2 glasses of water at 1 part per minute. The whole idea is preposterous. The whole idea is preposterous once you accept this science. Of course, they don't accept this. They're going to chuck Zhang's study out because he didn't control for some other factor. Now, Harvard last year, a team from Harvard, 2 from Harvard, 2 from China, did a meta-analysis. They gathered together all the studies of the same methodology which compared the IQ of children in a high fluoride village versus a low fluoride village. The study was published in Environmental Health Perspectives. Why is that significant? It's significant because it's the leading environmental health journal in the world. It's significant because it's also published by the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, which is part of the NIH. Yeah. Okay, I've got to hurry up a bit. So, 26 of the 27 studies found a lower average IQ in the high versus the low fluoride villages. The average lowering of IQ was 7 IQ points, which was highly significant. And they called for further research. But fluoridated countries are not doing research. They are concluding that the absence of study is the same as the absence of harm, which it isn't. And I've got an amusing example of this. If you don't look, you don't find. I heard the chief dental officer of Canada tell an audience in Dryden, Ontario, which had been fluoridated. He says, I walked down your high street today and I didn't see anyone growing horns, and you've been fluoridated for 40 years. This is the level of research on fluoride's effects in Canada. This is very bad science. Now, the promoters of fluoridation have argued that the concentrations used were very high and not relevant to water fluoridation. So the question is, were the levels in the high fluoride villages so high that they're not relevant to the United States? Well, the simplest thing to do is to actually look at the levels. I've pulled them out. 4.5, 0.88, 2.1 to 7.6, 1.8, 2.97, 1.8 to 2.69, 1 to 8.6, 2 to 11, 3.15, 2.9, 2.97, 0.57 to 4.5, 2.5, 1.66 to 9.42, 1.14, blah, 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 3.8 to 11, 2.38. Some of them go very high, some of them go to 11 parts per million, but the majority are less than 5 parts per million and very relevant to water fluoridation in this country. And I will rush over the next few slides. A Kansas newspaper tried to maintain that the authors had said there was no relevance to water fluoridation in the United States with these studies, and Philip Grandjean, one of the authors, responded, chemical brain drain should not be disregarded. The average IQ deficit in children exposed to increased levels of fluoride in drinking water was found to correspond to about 7 points, a sizable difference. To which extent this risk applies to fluoridation in Wichita or Portland or elsewhere is uncertain, but definitely deserves concern. That's on his blog, Chemical Brain Drain. Now, he also said, fluoride seems to fit in with lead, mercury. He's a specialist on mercury. He's done a famous study on mercury in fish, impact on parents and pharaohs, and other poisons that cause chemical brain drain. The effect of each toxicant may seem small, but the combined damage on a population scale can be serious, especially because the brain power of the next generation is crucial to all of us. And now I'd like to explain with pictures what he's talking about here. The IQ is distributed normally, the famous bell-shaped curve, okay? The average person, most people are going to average around an IQ of 100. But it's the two tails that we're interested in, particularly interested. The very bright people have an IQ of about over 130. This is where your geniuses are. The slower people have an IQ less than 70. This is where your mentally handicapped are. Now, if you shift the IQ curve over by 5 IQ points, which we believe we did when we had lead in gasoline, that's what we were doing to the IQ of our population of children, you wouldn't notice, a teacher would not notice the difference in IQ between a child of 100 and one of 95. A parent wouldn't notice the difference between two siblings, one 100 and 95. You don't notice that. But look what it does to the two tails. It halves the number of geniuses in your society, and it doubles the number of mentally handicapped. This has huge social and economic ramifications for a country like the United States. And it's utterly irresponsible for our health agencies, given the fact that we are deliberately exposing our kids to this neurotoxin, a problem that could be solved as easily as turning off a tap, are doing nothing. Been making no attempt to reproduce these studies, issuing no warnings, and pretending to the public that the most serious endpoint of fluoride is severe dental fluorosis, as if our teeth were more important than our brains. Consider the weight of evidence. We have over 100 animal studies that shows that fluoride can damage the brain. We have over 10 animal studies that shows that fluoride can change behavior. We have 4 studies that shows that fluoride can damage the fetal brain before the baby is born. We have 36 studies which shows a lowering of IQ, and we have another 7 human studies showing changes in neurobehavior. Take any one of those and it's cause for concern. Take the whole lot, and it's very, very serious indeed. I won't go into this. This is more support here, but I won't go into it. Fluoride and osteosarcoma. I'm going to go through this quickly, but it gives you a very clear indication of how politics interferes with science. In 2001, Elise Basson, a dentist at Harvard, successfully defended her PhD thesis. What she found was that young boys exposed to fluoridated water in their 6th, 7th or 8th years had a 5 to 7-fold increased risk of developing osteosarcoma by the age of 20. Between 2001 and 2005, Bassin's thesis advisor, Professor Chester Douglas, a known proponent of fluoridation and a consultant for Colgate, did not tell his peers or his funders or the National Research Council about his graduate students' research. Douglas promotes fluoridation, and I mentioned that. In January of 2005, acting on a tip-off, my son Michael found this PhD thesis tucked away in the rare book section of a Harvard library. He copied chapter 3, the chapter on osteosarcoma. We made it available to the environmental working group who launched an investigation, and they gave it to Harvard, and Harvard exonerated Douglas, saying he didn't deliberately conceal her findings. Harvard would not explain their verdict. Then in 2006, Bassin with 3 other co-researchers published a report, Cancer Causes and Control. In the same issue of the journal, Chester Douglas sends in a letter saying, don't take this subject, this paper too seriously. My larger study will show it doesn't hold the thesis. The study, he promised the study for the summer of 2006. We had to wait 5 years. It didn't come out until 2011. And when it came out, it did not refute Bassin's thesis. It couldn't have done, because their biometric of exposure, how they measured fluoride exposure, was fluoride levels in the bone at autopsy and biopsy. And how can you use those fluoride levels to investigate what the fluoride exposure was in the 6th, 7th, and 8th years?
He's drinking too much fluoride.
Yes. The part 3, the evidence of any benefit from swallowing fluoride is very weak. Wow, I really have overshot the clock here. I'll try to rush through this section, and we'll leave the... Actually, those who were here yesterday actually heard the last section. The evidence of any benefit is very weak. How much tooth decay would you have to save to justify lowering IQ or risking the death of a few children with osteosarcoma? Incredibly, the evidence is very weak. Oh, by the way, this is the CDC. This is what the CDC claimed when they were telling the world that fluoridation was one of the top 10 achievements of the 20th century. They said, look, the tooth decay in 12-year-olds is coming down from the 60s to the present, at the same time that the percentage of people drinking fluoridated water was going up. Voila! One is coming down because the other is going up. But you've already seen that that is utter nonsense. If they looked at the World Health Organization data, there's no way that you could ascribe this line to fluoridation when you get all these other lines of countries which are not fluoridated. If those authors were not aware of the World Health Organization data, they were incompetent. If they were aware of that data, this was an example of fraud. Now, the National Institute of Dental Research looked at 39,000 children in 84 countries, and they found that for children who'd always lived their lives in a fluoridated community, they had 2.8 decayed, missing, and filled surfaces. There are about 5 surfaces to a tooth, 128 by the time all the teeth have come out. The children who always lived in a non-fluoridated community, 3.4. Subtract 2.8 from 3.4, and we're talking about the amount of tooth decay saved in the largest survey conducted in the United States by pro-fluoridation researchers amounted to 0.6 of one tooth surface out of 128 tooth surfaces in a child's mouth. And this was not even shown to be statistically significant. Studies in Australia have found even less, between 0.12 and 0.3. One study in South Australia found no saving, no difference at all. And now I want to show you the scan. This is how they promote fluoridation. Bit of history. In Queensland, the Premier, the new Premier who was appointed, I think in 2008, introduced mandatory fluoridation. just as you had mandatory fluoridation in California, introduced in 1995. And the way they persuaded people that this was a good idea, they said Queenslanders who had lived, the children who lived in fluoridated Townsville, had 65% less tooth decay than non-fluoridated Brisbane. So this is what people saw in full-page ads in the newspapers. There's 65% less tooth decay in fluoridated Townsville compared to non-fluoridated Brisbane. Now, what do you think 65% less tooth decay looks like? Can you imagine? What's the impression? Think about it. Anyway, this is the data on which it was based. For 7-year-olds, tooth decay in Townsville was 0.09 tooth surfaces. In Brisbane, it's 0.26. Subtract 0.09 from 0.26. It's a saving of 0.17 of a tooth surface. And yes, they didn't lie. They didn't lie. In fact, 0.7 divided by 0.26 times 100 is 65%. But could you imagine full-page ads in the newspaper saying the saving of 0.17 of a tooth surface? Then it's worse than that. This was an outrageous example of cherry picking, which means scientists pull out the data which supports their agenda or their thesis. If they'd looked at 9-year-olds, the percentage reduction was only 20%, a saving of 0.1 of a tooth surface. But it gets worse. This apparently, according to Queensland Health, these are civil servants. These are not politicians, these are civil servants. This is what they think the teeth look like in a fluoridated community. Teeth exposed to fluoridated water. This is teeth that are exposed to non-fluoridated water. This is outrageous. This would make Goebbels blush. Imagine, this is what you'd see if you go to Sweden, Norway, Denmark, France, Luxembourg, Belgium, Italy, Greece. No, this is absolute nonsense, and this is being peddled by civil servants, only rivaled by my conversation today with your chief health officer. Again. Now, she's got a job to do. She's got a job to do. Her job is to get fluoridation into Sonoma County. She's a dangerous woman. She's very pleasant, but she's dangerous. If she doesn't do this, she will lose her job. She's got her marching orders. It's democracy that has to trump bureaucracy here. This is a review of the literature worldwide. The magnitude of fluoridation effect is not large in absolute terms, is often not statistically significant, and may not be of clinical significance. This was important research done in Iowa. This is a government-funded study. The Iowa study, they're looking at kids from birth. In this case, they were looking from kids from 0 to 9 years of age. And what the study was looking for was to find the optimal level of fluoride dose, the optimal dose of fluoride that would lower tooth decay. That's what they were looking for. And what they did was to measure tooth decay in these children on a daily basis, how much fluoride they got from water, how much from toothpaste, how much from food, and did a total calculation. They found no relation between tooth decay and the amount of fluoride ingested. This is what they say. These findings suggest that achieving a caries-free status may have relatively little to do with fluoride intake. All right? And what basis then do you put fluoride in the water? And I gave this presentation a couple of years in New Zealand, and whilst I was away, one of the promoters came back and said this: Professor Connett's highlighting of the conclusion from Warren et al. That there was no relationship between fluoride ingested and tooth decay levels is unsurprising. It is generally accepted that the principal caries protective effect from fluoride is topical. Precisely, Dr. Wyman, precisely. The benefit is topical. There is no need to swallow it. There is no need to force it on people that don't want it. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
we got the truth. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to let him rest his voice for just a second while I finish up a couple of things. I wanted to make sure you know there's a t-shirts.
Oh, you want me to read them?
The t-shirts, no, I'll tell you, got them. And then there's a book, and in part of our fundraiser, one of the things that's important about this book is in the back, there's 80 pages, little tiny words of references of studies. 80 pages. This is what every one of our supervisors needs to read. Okay, I've got a lot of questions. I've got one that's asked to me, and then I'm giving you a little break, especially after you lost your saliva today with chopping. Did he tell you that? He got so shocked by, he just, saliva went out of his mouth, and I had to go get him some water. It was shocking. Okay, there's a little kid here, and I'm gonna do this. I had a question to me, and this is important. Why are you taking such a friendly approach to such a serious problem? So anyone who really actually knows me, knows this is a different year that I'm in. But what I want to say to you is, there's like a plan A, plan B, plan C, and plan D, but you can't do plan D and go back to A. We have one of the supervisors that we have, and it is in their hands. People have asked me, should we recall, should we, riot, should we, whatever, fill in the blank, you know what I'm talking about, right? We can only love them and support them, and I mean this in the, I'm going to tell you what I wrote a resolution on this, is this what I'm talking about. We can only do that. We can't go back to that. We can only push them in the right direction. One of our supervisors is brand spanking new and tried to take a stand on this and got her head chopped off. Okay, I'm not using names right now, but you need to understand she's really on her side. We have to give her the due and support her doing the right thing. So, okay, so there is a resolution I'm hoping everyone will sign. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to say what it says at the end. Most of the things that are really poignant in his presentation are the whereases. Everyone knows what a resolution is, right? I'm not going to read the whole thing right now. You can take a copy home. It's whereas. Then the request. Therefore, we request that the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors vote no on the implementation of fluoridation in Sonoma County and vote to support removal of the mandate language from AB 733, state level. Changing the present language requiring fluoridation to language simply recommending fluoridation, you can only make baby changes in legislation, with no penalty for non-compliance, thus returning the choice of fluoridation and control to you. Okay? This is what we're signing. We're going to get thousands of them by the time the vote comes up. It won't come up before about 6 months. They've got to do this engineering thing. Okay, so that's enough of that. And I hope you will take that and realize that we're going to do that first. Believe me, plan B and C and D, I will let you know, but we're going to do this first, okay? This isn't going to happen here. It's my stand. There's a 9-year-old in this room that asked me, how much of this fluoride would I have to ingest before it would kill me? And that is, when the kids learn about it, they don't understand all this. They just want to know. So we're not really going to, I'll give this back to you after I read a couple of these questions. Okay. Some of them overlap, and I'm really trying to get everybody included. So, there are questions about the pineal part of the brain, if it's going to make you spiritually degraded or whatever. As a nutritionist, I'm going to tell you, if something inhibits your metabolism, which fluoride will, your enzymes, your minerals, it's going to inhibit your metabolism. You, as a healthy being, it's all about metabolism. When you lose energy, you don't feel spiritual. When you lose energy, you don't feel like participating. You know what I'm saying. It's all about energy, and that kind of answers that question.
You want to have any on that?
You go right ahead.
Okay. Jennifer Luke in England did her PhD thesis on the pineal gland with respect to fluoride. The pineal gland is located between the two hemispheres of the brain. It's not protected by the blood-brain barrier, so fluoride can get in. It has the second highest perfusion rate of blood per unit volume of any tissue in the body except the kidney, so lots of fluoride will get in. And thirdly, it's a calcifying tissue, like the teeth and the bones. It lays down little crystals of calcium hydroxyapatite. She had 11 corpses analyzed and found that the average level of fluoride in the pineal gland on these crystals was 9,000 parts per million, went up to 21,000 parts per million. That's higher than the bone levels in somebody with crippling skeletal fluorosis. So that was the first part of her thesis, that it concentrated in the human pineal gland. And second experiment that she did was to look at the effect on animals. Now, the pineal gland produces a hormone called melatonin. It only makes the melatonin at night. It's sometimes called the hormone of darkness. The pineal gland is sometimes referred to as the third eye because it's sensitive to light. Anyway, this is thought to be like a biological clock, controlling the onset of puberty, sleep patterns, jet lag, and aging. And there's a lot of research being done on it with the possibility of its relationship with cancer. Anyway, as far as puberty is concerned, it turns out that the highest levels are in young children, and as the level of melatonin falls at a certain point, that's the switch for the onset of puberty, for the sex hormones to be produced. And what she found is that the animals that had the high fluoride had lower melatonin production and were reaching puberty earlier than the low fluoride animals. And I should also remind you, if you remember, I referred to the Newberg-Kingston study in the cortical bone defects. That same study found that the young girls in the fluoridated town were menstruating on average 5 months earlier than the young girls in the non-fluoridated community. They didn't think it was important at the time. Now, what I find striking about this finding, we have made this her PhD thesis and referenced her published studies, made these available to health agencies. Not one single health agency in a fluoridated country has made any effort to reproduce this study. None.
Okay, one of the biggest, there's several people asked how your meeting went with Silver Chalfin, and I got to observe, and the most amazing, I have to share this, as a nutritionist that taught doctors how to take people off of prescription medications that were unnecessary, I had to explain the mechanism of action to the doctors to get my rights to get in and talk to them. They just want to treat me like I don't know what I'm talking about, right? And they'd ask me, well, what's the mechanism of action of that drug? He asked her, when you ingest fluoride, what is the mechanism of action that makes it work if you think it works? What happened?
She wouldn't answer that question. She wouldn't answer that question. There's only 2 times in my life that I have found an interesting situation where the saliva completely drains from my mouth and my tongue feels like the size of a cucumber and over here on the floor. Now, this happened, first of all, when I was testifying in a hearing on incineration in Lisbon, Connecticut. When I went to the podium and announced myself, I said, Dr. Paul Connett. And this consultant in the front row went, Dr. Connett, ha, ha, ha! And he proceeded to interrupt like this during this, I was absolutely, all this, has anybody that happened to anybody here? The saliva goes from your mouth and you can't talk. Well, this happened today for the second time, trying to get rational answers to rational questions. It was impossible, impossible. It was like talking to a robot. I can't say anymore.
It was worse than a robot.
And nothing personal in this. I don't know the woman. I'm sure she's a lovely person. I'm not attacking her. It's just that it was like talking to a robot that has an agenda.
There are several questions in here, and I'm glad you brought this up, can you, we take a shower with fluoride in it. Can you dermally absorb it? Absolutely, you can dermally absorb it. You can wash your dogs and cats in it, all of it. They're getting more than they need. Think of a little baby sitting in the sink getting washed. That's horrible. So I just thought I'd answer that.
Actually, the science in that is not very clear-cut. Not many studies have been done, or they should be very easily. You put someone in a bath, draw blood every few minutes, in a bath at 1 part per million, hot bath, and see if the blood levels of fluoride go up. It should be feasible to do. It should get somebody a master's degree. As far as I know, it hasn't been done. But my gut feeling is that in a hot bath, your pores will open. and the fluoride will go through the pores. It can't go directly through the skin because it's water soluble, but through the pores it should go. And I have had anecdotal evidence that some people, when they shower in fluoridated water, but not in non-fluoridated water, come out with big red blotches under the arms and the backs. Has anybody else got that symptom of, over there, red blotches? This is interesting. Red blotches on the face, on the back.
Chlorine can do that too.
Yeah, fluorine can do that. Wait,
Chlorine will do that too.
Yeah.
To some people who are sensitive. Okay, this is kind of your favorite question because your testing questions. Can you be tested for your own content of fluoride in your body?
Yes, you can have your urine tested, although it's not a routine test in the United States. There's no interest in tracking our exposure to fluoride among doctors or the medical establishment. But there's no reason why any lab could not do a test of fluoride in the urine. But that only gives you your daily exposure. Half the fluoride that you take in the day, half of it will come out in the urine. You can back calculate how much fluoride in milligrams per day that you're getting. And the shock is when they started to do this in England, they found people with very high doses, and largely because they drink so much tea in England. So much tea. So if you're a tea drinker, watch out. Try to mix it. Try to have coffee, which there's not much fluoride in, herbal teas, but mix them. Don't have all tea. There have been examples in this country with excessive consumption of iced tea. People have got skeletal fluorosis, poisoning of the bone. So be careful with that one.
Okay, so this is kind of a, there's like 4 or 5 that are hovering around this because I know it's a...
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, what we would really like to find out, except it's a little painful, is to get a bone biopsy of the iliac crest bone to see how much fluoride you've accumulated over a lifetime, to give you some indication of whether you should be avoiding fluoride like crazy. There are certain levels of fluoride which are associated not very well with the different stages of skeletal fluorosis, from preclinical, stage 1, stage 2, and then crippling skeletal fluorosis.
Okay. One of the questions is, what can we do to educate our doctors and dentists regarding fluoride? And I'm just go through this one quick so I can get on to more. I just want to make an announcement that on April 7th, we're going to have an organizational meeting like we did yesterday to set up perhaps an educational meeting when he comes back that we can invite some of our doctors and stuff too. So I will hope, I'm going to do that on that meeting to see if we can have a meeting specifically aimed at physicians, okay? So
we should have
stay tuned, take my phone number.
We should have a meeting aimed at physicians and dentists, but another one for folks like yourself so we can get into the action stuff, you know, recommendations for what we can do. But
in order to get out of here at 8 o'clock, I'm just going to make a note that I'm not taking any more questions because I'm really working hard to get through the ones I got already.
But most dentists are not the enemy. They only taught one thing at dental school. They're usually too busy treating patients. They're very busy. They can't do what I do, which is to read all the literature. So unfortunately, they take at face value. But they did a recent survey of dentists in this country, and over half the dentists did not feel confident about promoting water fluoridation. So it's always assumed that all dentists are pro-fluoridation. They are not.
You know, this is confusing, and you addressed it in your slideshow, and it's, can you expand on, you know, that fluoride is, once purchased, is no longer considered hazardous? I know you...
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I tell you a funny joke on that. Johnstown, New York, tried to fluoridate the community without the people knowing. The people found out and quickly squelched the practice. And a few days later, a memorandum went out from the water department which said, we have to get rid of this fluoridating chemical to another community within the next couple of months, because then, if we don't, it reverts to being a hazardous waste, and it's going to cost us an arm and a leg to get rid of it. Yes, I'm serious. Yeah, if you stop using it as a product, then it becomes a hazardous waste again.
See, so on the back of it, there's just one question that asks about, are those living near where the hexafluorosalicylic acid is put in the water, Are they more danger? Well, really, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you do have to have it has to be a hazmat trained person that puts it in. And so it's really dangerous for the person that puts it in, but they are hazmat trained, so they're dressed up right. We're not going to go into that anymore.
In its neat form, it's horrible stuff.
Yeah.
It's horrible stuff in its neat form, but it is diluted 180,000 to 1. Simple, fluoride is bad, hexafluorosilicic acid is worse. But I think the real argument is about the arsenic contaminant.
Yeah. So there are like 5 questions that hover around and it's normal, the mistrust of everyone involved, who's getting paid what for putting it in, why would they push so hard, and there's so much information about it, and like that.
Okay.
I know it's a tough one.
So there are economic interests involved. Big Sugar has always promoted fluoridation because they want to reduce tooth decay without reducing sugar consumption. The industries that use a huge amount of fluoride in their manufacturing, like aluminum, like steel, like oil, like ceramics, like brickworks, like phosphate, all have a concern about liabilities from fluoride. And if it's found that the fluoride at 1 part per million is causing health problems, then they've got a real problem with liabilities from their workers' lawsuits. Also, I think the toothpaste manufacturers are going to get a big hit in liability if fluoride causes harm. And I think the American Dental Association, that has its seal of approval on all these fluoride products, is also going to get a big hit. So liabilities is key. But as far as the public health people are concerned, I think the real driver there is a tremendous fear of losing credibility on a public health practice, because if they lose that credibility, they lose the public's trust, and if they lose the public's trust, it's going to be much more difficult to enforce things like vaccination. That's what they're, I think, really concerned about, because that's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So whilst they may not feel that saving 0.2 of a tooth surface is something to go to the wall for, they might go to the wall to protect a direct challenge to the safety of vaccinations.
You know, I just want to acknowledge that there is a local city council person in this room besides the dentist. So, I mean, I just wanted to give you hope. Yeah, you got it.
Well done.
You don't want me to. You, Mark Landman from Kentucky.
How are you? Can't hear you.
Okay, now, almost done. There's a couple questions here about bottled water and how do you get fluoride out of the water, and do you want to answer that?
Yeah, unfortunately, unlike Canada and unlike Europe, there's no requirement in the good old United States to have a listing of the minerals present in the water. So we are flying blind on our water, just as we're flying blind on genetically engineered content. So that's one thing that we should be campaigning for, is to get the labeling of water. So the best you can do is to phone up, use the 800 number, phone up the water company to see what the level of fluoride is. If you can get a company supplying low levels of fluoride in your water, I suggest that that is the cheapest way to supply your house with decent water for drinking and cooking. No protection against water in the garden, no protection against showering and bathing. As far as removing the fluoride, the cheap filters do not do it. By the way, boiling makes it worse. If you boil water, it becomes more concentrated in fluoride, not less. You boil the steam off, you leave the fluoride behind. Unlike chlorine, you boil the excess chlorine off. The cheap filters will not do it. I have real serious concerns about reverse osmosis, waste of water, waste of energy. There's apparently bone char is effective at removing fluoride that's used on a large scale in India. You can get it commercially in this country. If anybody's interested, I can give you somebody that knows where to order it from. But the system that I like is a mixed cation-anion exchange resins, which remove both the positive ions and the negative ions. The beauty of it is it's fast, it doesn't leave a lot of crap behind, and you can tell when it needs to be the resin needs to be replaced, because the conductivity of the solution jumps up dramatically when the first ions come to it. What's that?
Oh, put the microphone closer.
Oh, sorry. This is the system that I would advocate. I haven't got one myself yet. Is a mixed cation and anion exchange resin. These are two resins. One resin will remove all the positive ions, the metal ions. The other resin will remove all the negative ions and replace each with H plus and OH minus, which instantly reform water. So you get pure water out of the bottom, and you can tell when the resin's used up because the conductivity, which you can have a little instrument for that, will immediately jump up. I've seen it on operation in Mark Diesendorf's house in Sydney, Australia, and I always send people to him to get the name of the company.
Where do you get that? It takes all minerals out of the water.
Yeah, it takes all minerals out of the water. That's the problem. That's the problem. If you
Minerals from the bone, after about 2 to 6 weeks, the water will start leaching minerals from the bones.
Oh, yeah, well, this is okay. I'm glad you raised that because the problem of reverse osmosis, this ion exchange and distillation, is they remove all the ions which are beneficial. So if you do this, you can get from a health store a mixture of nutrients, I think in liquid form, that you can add to the water after you've done this. But believe me, don't worry about that until you lose. You want to put all your energy and all your money into keeping it out of Sonoma County. That's where you should.
Story, since we have a city council person here, I'm a former city council person, the 8 contractors that would be affected, the Sonoma County Water Agency puts the fluoride up at the top, which they don't want to do. Those 8 contractors have to re-sign an agreement and get along. Where's hope? They're not going to. So sorry, that's the truth. And I can say that having been a city council person, that no, the cities don't, it takes a long time for them to agree on stuff. And they have to reopen an agreement that they have with each other on how to operate with their water. I got an easy one for you. I think you addressed it in your slideshow. Is it true the topical application of fluoride, is better than, you kind of used it, and you can probably say that in a sentence.
Yes, that allows me to qualify that. As I said, I haven't used fluoridated toothpaste for 16 years. I do think that it's more rational to use fluoridated toothpaste than to swallow it, to drink it. There's no need to fluoridate the water. However, if you ask me what we should be doing, I think we should all be using xylitol toothpaste. The xylitol is a natural sugar. We produce it in our own bodies, about 15 grams each day. The beauty of xylitol is it prevents the bacteria that converts sugar into acid. It's the acid which attacks the enamel and starts the tooth decay. In the presence of xylitol, those bacteria cannot survive in the mouth. They have to stick to the teeth. And if they have xylitol in their system, they can't stick, and so they wither away. The beauty of xylitol toothpaste, it not only protects the mother, but it protects the baby, because there's a certain amount of mouth-to-mouth contact between the mother and the baby through kissing, through licking the teat of the bottle. And that's how the bacteria from the mother's mouth get into the baby's mouth and self-perpetuating. But if you protect the mother, you will also protect the baby. Now, the only drawback to xylitol that I've heard is that some dogs are killed by xylitol. Therefore, I strongly recommend that we do not advocate xylitol chewing gum, but xylitol mints on the one hand, and xylitol toothpaste on the other, which I don't think a dog is going to get near. In Wichita, Kansas, they have used xylitol mints in schools in low-income areas. They give the kid a xylitol mint to suck in the morning and one to suck in the afternoon. The kids like it. It has a nice taste, and it has helped. We should also be thinking of doing things like teaching kids how to brush their teeth in schools, making a much bigger thing about nutrition, getting kids and parents to eat more vegetables. Yeah, that's about it. And oh, by the way, xylitol has been endorsed by many national dental associations. It is, in fact, been used in Scandinavia and Japan for over 30 years. So it's a good track record. You have a quick question back there? Oh my God. Oh, to me, the worst issue right now, the worst thing that mankind is doing is to introduce genetically engineered species into agriculture. If you want to know how arrogant a human being is, then look at the arrogant creatures who work for Monsanto, who should be banned off the face of the earth. Now I'll tell you what I really think about genetic.
Yeah, that probably should have been his finale. I don't know. Okay, almost done.
Have you ever seen a mouse make love to a strawberry? Yes, it should come from pine bark, yeah. Xylitol.
That's in the street, it's hanging across the street. You gotta be careful with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so just check with the manufacturer where it comes from.
I'm gonna wrap up because we have an agreement to be out of the room because that's what we rented it for. But there is a question here, and I'm going to answer real quick so I can get through that, and I'll just throw these one or
But
two.
it is the Unitarian Church, and they're lovely people.
They are lovely people. They are. And there's a question here about criminal prosecution, the law, and that kind of stuff, because this is illegal and unethical, fluoride. I'm just going to tell everyone in this room, I forgot to tell you, and wait a minute, there is another city council person here. Gary Wysocki's here from Santa Rosa.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So that's great. That's good that you're here. Now, I just want to we don't have to answer this. There's a lot of things there's still things we're working on and we don't have direct answers. That's why we're going to have working groups from here on out. I want to let you know I have filed a Sonoma County grand jury investigation on the it said it's unethical to medically to give this undosed forcing it on people and as a civil rights issue. And I specifically cited Chalfin as the culprit. So we're going to keep names. So we're working on hardcore stuff too. So I think we're almost done. There are achievement gap things and how fluoride affects people with autoimmunes and stuff like that. And just the simple answer to that is anyone who's vulnerable or sick or elderly or they're malabsorptive or they're in that whole category of autoimmune and all that, of course, persons who are already vulnerable will be affected by anything that's a toxin, worse than a regular healthy person. So we can get past that one.
Yeah, I think it's very important. This, as a general principle, the government should not be putting anything into the water which is going to make life harmful for any human being. You've got to be able to protect everyone. And we can say categorically that people on board with borderline iodine deficiency should not get fluoride, period. And the people with kidney dysfunction should not get fluoride. And how on earth, if you put fluoride in the water, are you going to protect these people? And how, for that matter, are you going to make sure that families of low income have fluoride-free water to make up formula? So you're getting yourself into a situation where you're going to have victims. You're going to have victims of this practice. And we're not studying those victims.
And this is, I know this might take longer to explain, and maybe you can just say something in general, but it is an important question. Obviously in Europe, where they're not fluoridating, their health ministers or the whatever, had things put in front of them they used to decide against fluoridating their countries. There are some smart people on the planet. What did the studies they use? How did that happen?
Well, I think personally that the Europeans are more sensitive to the precautionary principle than we are in America. And it's possibly that America has distilled out from the rest of the world the risk takers. Because going back in time, you had to take risks to get here. And people are still taking risks to get here. So we seem to be more willing to take risks here than in Europe. In the Netherlands, they were particularly sensitive to having something forced upon them because they lived under the Nazis in World War II. And this is all documented in a wonderful book called Fluoridation, The Freedom Fight by Dr. Hans Muhlenberg. And by the way, Dr. Hans Muhlenberg had half his patients from fluoridated Amsterdam and half his patients from non-fluoridated Haarlem. And he was able to compare the two. And often people would come with symptoms that he has associated with sensitivity to fluoride based upon a book written by Dr. George Walbart. And he was able to say to these people that had these symptoms, well, the first thing you should do is to stop drinking the water. Stop drinking the fluoridated water. And if the symptoms cleared up, that was simple. Then it was due to the water. If the symptoms didn't clear up, it was a different system, caused by something else. He found that about 4% of people were sensitive to fluoride. And he particularly indicated that babies with colic, one of the symptoms of a baby getting fluoridated water is colic. And that's quite reasonable when you think about it. The fluoride, when it hits the stomach, becomes hydrogen fluoride and then makes the membranes of the whatever more sensitive.
Well, I just want to, in conclusion, especially for the 9-year-olds, if they're still here, we were on a talk show today at 11:15, and the woman on that talk show said, at the conclusion of her show, if this is bad for children, it's bad for our future. And that is the #1 reason why we should stop it. So I want to just thank everyone for coming. Please sign up if you want to find out when the next meetings are.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.